There are many different stories. A story of hope where the protagonist overcomes adversity and continues to grow. Or a tragic story of a protagonist whose life was once great, but then goes into a downward spiral. Or even a story where the person thought to be the protagonist turns out to be the final boss other protagonists must defeat. Everyone has their own story. How many times have I talked about a certain aspect of Webtoons that I really like? I don't know the answer, mainly because I'm too lazy to look for the answer. But I think it all feeds back into two main things: originality and honesty. Webtoon provides people with the chance to create their own stories. A chance to write their own tales, the tales of heroes and villains, a tale of love or a tale of mystery and wonder. Webtoon gives people, not companies, not big organizations, people the chance to make the stories they want. The stories that they wanted to hear when they were kids. The stories that they think they should tell right now. The stories that we need to hear right now. Stories that aren't just limited to what is statistically proven to be enjoyable for consumers. Oftentimes they delve into topics that most typically don't, like mental illness or sexual trauma. Now, just because something is original doesn't automatically make it a wonderful masterpiece. In fact, originality could disrupt basically everything that works for storytelling. But by making original stories, we get to see these tales that have never been told before, and never been thought of before. A big example of this is, well, basically every tale of heroes. The underdog story. The scrappy or heroic hero that goes against enemies that everyone has fallen to. And through ideals, beliefs, motives, intelligence, and weird plot armor, the good guy wins and everyone celebrates. I'm not trashing on this stereotype, by the way. I actually really like it, and I think it gives an important lesson. That a hero doesn't always have to be the strongest or most skilled, but anyone with the right mindset can be a hero. However, it's been played out a lot, and it can get a little boring. And in a lot of shows, we really never get to see the other side to that. A protagonist with absurd amounts of power. Sure, I can think of a couple, but barely enough to count them on one hand, and even fewer that are actually interesting. Which is where Webtoons come into play, and a webcomic, I'll get to that in a sec, as it provides us with 3 stories that show us the consequences of too much power. You can check out the Webtoons and webcomic that'll be spoiling in the description. First, let's talk about a webtoon that only came out a few months ago. A webtoon that has been suggested quite a bit. The Boxer. Following you, our dead inside main character, who is so over life that he really doesn't care what happens to him, leading him to get bullied a lot. But he really doesn't care. He wasn't living life for anything, and he's barely living in general. However, after this gifted bully gets really into boxing, another kid that's constantly being bullied stands up for you. And while he puts up a fight, it's very clearly not enough. But before the battle is over, Yu asks a simple question: if it's fun to hit people. Eventually tearing through everyone that bullied him, and even that gifted bully that was learning to box. Yu's motivations are unclear. In fact, throughout the entire story, while we're practically given everyone's thoughts, the coaches, the opponents, all of the opponents' coaches, the ring spectator, the throwaway ring doctor, we get everyone's thoughts, but almost never Yu's. His only personality is dead inside and cats, which is relatable, but still. As our main character, you'd expect more from him. But that's just it. We get nothing. The most characterization we get out of him is his cat. Like in the quote before, Yu is treated as a final boss. The unstoppable force that heroes constantly try to take down. But that's the thing. Yu isn't treated like a villain. But he's barely treated as the hero. Even though he's a constant throughout the entire webtoon, we only get very small glimpses into his head. But the most important one is at the end of the lightweight division World Championship. After beating a man that is deemed a perfectionist, a man who has held the title for 10 years and has never lost, losing in a matter of seconds. Normally, this is where the hero cheers, when the final boss is defeated and the protagonist claims their prize, in this case, the belts in the lightweight division World Championship title. But Yu doesn't care. His thought at the end, when the fans are cheering and he holds the belts, is just 2 words. It's loud. Nothing more, nothing less. Yu is likely the best out there, but that's the problem with being the best there is. When you're at the top, you're alone. No one encourages you. No one pushes you forward. The webtoon likes to show us characters on top of these giant stone pillars. But like that, you're alone, all the way at the top, above everyone. And when you're above everyone, people look at you differently, talk to you differently, act differently around you. And often, when you're at the top, you lose yourself, and you deal with issues that most people wouldn't. The webtoons and webcomic show us people at the top losing themselves and struggling with things that most people don't. Yu isn't the clearest example of both, but he has no emotion, no drive, no ambition, no desire, no hope, nothing. Yu is an empty husk of a man. He can feel no joy, no passion, no excitement. To him, winning that belt, showing the world he's at the top, didn't matter. He felt nothing at the bottom, and he's feeling nothing at the top. Yu cannot feel anything. And it's not like Yu would be the only person who lost himself while being on the top. While not a webtoon, solo leveling is the exception to my only webtoon rule. Except for my first couple of videos, but I'm going to private those anyways. But solo leveling, a webcomic that I've made a video on before, follows Sun Jinwoo, a hunter, known as the world's weakest hunter. The man is lower than a low tier, or he's an E-rank hunter, the lowest of the lows. But through some convoluted means starts to go stronger and stronger. One of the strongest hunters in South Korea, if not the world. But one of his goals is to, eventually, find a way to save his mom from something called the eternal slumber, a sleep that one cannot wake from. Not only is the patient unable to wake up, but the patient also consumes their life force at an incredible rate, and thus requires a life support machine that uses magical energy. While not being the focus for the beginning of solo leveling, Hunter Sun Jinwoo eventually does find a cure and wakes up his mom from a seemingly incurable disease. By this time, Hunter Sun Jinwoo has risen to the top. He has a shadow army by his side, all of the guilds chasing after him, and now he has saved his mother. But something's off. He's obviously incredibly touched and emotional that his mom has just woken up. However, it's strange. My efforts were not in vain. I feel like all my troubles until now were leading up to reward me with this moment. But while working as a hunter, I wonder if I distanced myself too much. We see that while his sister and mom are crying together, he is surrounded by shadows, almost like he's separated from a life with his family. Almost like he lost a part of himself while rising to the top. Like he's been hardened by constant endangerment of death and monster murder. But he lost a part of who he used to be. From a smiling, happy, childlike punk, to an unsmiling and threatening hunter. Finally, we move on to this channel's most popular fictional figures. John Doe and Serafina, from Unordinary, of course. I briefly mentioned in my last video, 2 weeks ago, I was sick, thank you for waiting, that Unordinary does a good job at presenting the consequences of power, both the lack of power and the abundance of it. First, we get Serafina, the ace of Wellston, the strongest student of Wellston. While basically everyone was under her, it didn't stop any difficulties. In fact, it likely increased them. We hear Serafina's personal thoughts while she was at the top. Good grades and strength don't just come from nowhere. I worked hard to get where I am. I'm the smartest. And I'm the strongest. I do everything that's expected of me. But what do I get in return? I made it. I'm at the top. So why do I still have to follow the rules? Why do I have to impress everyone? Why don't I get to do what I want? Being at the top is a cage of expectations. Expectations to be someone you might not be. Expectations to be perfect, to be the best no matter what. Eventually you lose yourself in those expectations, believing them to be more important than who you want to be. Eventually Serafina is able to break off from those expectations. But you should know that they still exist. She's just not held down by them anymore. Eventually, being able to break off from the expectations of her own mother, something that was clearly an ordeal to her. However, while Serafina has broken free from the chains of expectations, and in turn becoming more herself, and not accepting the pressure of being someone perfect, John starts to show his power. Now, expectations don't typically hold him back, but it's more the power itself. It goes to his head. When he's finally strong, he doesn't know how to handle it. At first, he just fights back, but he eventually crushes literally everyone that looks at him funny, because John has lost trust in everyone. So much so that he doesn't feel safe to be himself. And the lack of trust in everyone made him paranoid of everyone's actions. Claire hurt him by betraying him. And while he tried to turn over a new leaf, Arlo dragged it back out of him. Now he feels like everyone is using him. He feels like everyone has a motive, that everyone is out to get him. When a character has so much power that they basically can't lose a fight, to make it interesting, you have to make him struggle with something else. With you, it's passion. He's the boxer, he's the best, but he doesn't care. He doesn't need to be at the best. He doesn't feel anything when he wins any fight. With Sung Jin-woo, it's connections. His family, something he's longed for forever, is now right in front of him, yet he can't grasp it. With Serafina, it's expectations, or the weight of other people's expectations, pushing you down, making you someone you're not. And with John, it's mental health and trust. He's broken by it, crushed, paranoid, feeling like everyone is out to get him. These characters are ultra powerful, but they're strangely incomplete, because they're not themselves. We often focus on the journey of getting strong, but I think by being strong, starting out in a place of strength, they can tackle other obstacles, dangers within themselves, and become someone they want to be, regardless of strength, skill, or power. By making them strong, by having them in a place of strength, we see a different story. A story of lack of trust, of expectations, of connections, of ambition, of feelings. We see the consequences of power, and how they can put a weight on anyone, even our main characters. But that's just what I think. What about you? What consequences do you think I missed, or some that I've gotten wrong? Leave it in the comments below. And like always, thank you for watching. And thank you for giving me a week off.